I gave you an introduction just a few seconds ago, but you've briefed every president since Bill Clinton on the subject of UFOs. You have 3 personal friends that have been assassinated since, I believe, May 9th of 2001.
And those were before.
Those were before.
Yeah.
May 9th, the reason I bring up May 9th, 2001 is that's when you first hosted the National Press Club for the U.S. UFO Disclosure Project, which ironically was just 4 months before September 11th, 2001, where over 20 intelligence officers came forward with information about UFOs. Would you like to go in there?
Yeah, I do. And I want to start early on. So the way this evolved in the early 90s, I had started a project dealing with this. And we had set up a protocol where we had made contact with these objects. That ended up being on the front page of the Pensacola, Florida paper. Army intelligence and CIA found out about it, and then they came in and started asking me, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And that started a whole process. Never been in the U.S. government, never been in the military, never been in the intelligence community. So I started out pretty cold and pretty green. I'm an emergency doctor, trauma, big ER. Each of us saw 6,000 people a year. The Gun and Knife Club, we called it. And by 93, I was being asked to go up and brief the director of the CIA for Bill Clinton, R. James Woolsey. Now, I'm a 30-some-year-old medical doctor going up, and the letter that came to me, and this is the key point I want to make, stated, and I have it, it's in my archive, it's going to come out pretty soon publicly, and it says, you're going to be the first person to brief the Clinton administration and the director of the CIA on this issue, because they made inquiries and have been denied access. So at that point, I went up, took the meeting. The cover story was a dinner party for me and my wife and the CIA director and his wife, who was the chief operating officer of National Academy of Sciences, and our host, who was a think tank director for the Pentagon, and his wife. So there's 6 of us. And sure enough, he was very shaken. He absolutely had not been read in. And so I provided him a lot of information. And I brought a whole briefcase full of evidence, documents, photographs, this, that. And this was 30 years ago this year. At that point, my whole paradigm tilted, where I realized there's something very wrong with this. And I didn't know anything about, the popular terms now, or the counter state, or the deep state, or secret government, illegal projects, on and on and on. It was off my radar, totally. He says, well, what am I going to do? He says, I can't act. I'll be rogue unless the Secretary of Defense and the President authorize me to do something like this. And I said, well, that's not going to be forthcoming. We've already attempted that. And he also said something that was very spooky. He said, how do I take on a group that have technologies that can do circles around the best thing I know we have, a B-2 stealth? He says, that's the best thing I know to deploy. And I have found out, and I have now convinced there is, a secret organization that have technologies that can literally do circles around my B-2. And I said, yes. And he just said, it's point, set, match. He says, I don't even know how to take that on. And that is how that meeting ended. I later found it was on Eisenhower's watch, unfortunately. He was old, he was tired, he was a 4-star general, World War II, that this group of, this secret government group sort of seized control over these operations. So in reality, the constitutional government of the United States has not been in a proper oversight and control of these operations since the late 1950s. So what I did in the 90s up to the 2001 event, and what I've done since, is put together sort of a whole puzzle, a mosaic, based on thousands of little pieces of data. Mm-hmm. So, the evidence is easy to get your mind around one at a time. What's hard to get your mind around is the entire intelligence analysis that has to go with it. So that's what I've specialized in, is gathering that data and then connecting all the dots. Let's say you were someone who had been involved in an operation at the Dugway Proving Grounds out in Utah, there's a DUM there, deep underground military base, that's very much involved with this issue. And there are assets there, man-made, anti-gravity, very advanced aircraft. That I have people who have been there who've seen them come up at night and move out. They'd be huge black triangles. And those are ours, by the way. And what I discovered, and this was a very strange thing from 93 to now, every time I take a meeting with a high-level member of the U.S. government who should know about this given their rank or their position. For example, when I briefed years ago, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Patrick Hughes, a 3-star. Well, as anyone knows who's been in the military, that position is the top of the food chain for military intelligence, period. It's and the DIA is like the CIA for civilian. It's military. He had completely been denied access.
The director of the DIA is completely denied access.
I had a multi-hour meeting with him in his office. How, in what universe can the head of the DIA or the CIA or the president or the chair people of armed services in the Senate or in the Select Committee on Intelligence not have been read in on this? When we are funding it, we estimate there's somewhere over the last 70 years, $8 to $10 trillion that have gone into these projects that are unaccounted for. My first meetings with people, like the CIA director, after like 10 minutes of going through the evidence, he says, yeah, I know this is real. He wanted to know, why is it this level of secrecy? Who's keeping it secret? How are they doing this? So that is actually the bigger question. The evidence you can get your mind around.
So the entire energy field, everything that has anything to do with energy becomes completely obsolete at this point.
Yeah, and all transportation systems, internal combustion engines, jet engines, rockets, surface roads. So now, surface roads, I say that only because when you take that same physics and do a torsion, a counter-rotating field, you can get what's called an electrogravitic effect, or anti-gravity, pop culture term. It's a terrible term. It's not anti-gravity. But you can create this electromagnetic field where an object becomes essentially weightless and can move. This is why if you look at the radar tracings of these things, these objects can be moving at 200,000 miles an hour, make a right-hand turn. And there are occupants on these. Now, any pilot knows if you had the G-forces of that, your brains would come out of your nose. There's no way, it'd be fatal. But because it's correcting for 1G, and there's a sort of a bubble, an envelope in space-time that this object is moving in, there's no limit to what it can do. Now, what's interesting is that the Pentagon has officially said those objects that have been released of the Tic Tac and other UFOs that have been documented with sensors on ships, on board aircraft, and in space, well, they're not disclosing those sensors, but I know what they are. Those are physical objects moving without any known means of propulsion. Go look at what's been said by the Pentagon. Now, what the person who said that, the Pentagon, says we don't know how they're moving because that spokesman hasn't been read in to these deep black projects that are in this parallel universe of this secret government. It's been my job to collect the actionable intelligence, the documents, and the people who know this and put it together and put it into briefings for people. So I've provided this to every Minister of Defense and Secretary of Defense for the 4 of the 5 Eyes, which are, of course, U.S., Canada, Australia, UK. I have not done it for New Zealand. But in every single case, when I've met with these guys, either they're former or current MOD heads or what have you, they've said, we were never read into this. So this data point, let me extend the data point globally. So some years ago, there was this really amazing guy named Lord Hill Norton. He was a 5-star admiral. They used to call him a Sea Lord. Don't you love? I mean, I love the British. They're fantastic. A Sea Lord. And he had been head of the MOD, which means in the UK, you're head of MI5, MI6, it's like our CIA and stuff. But he was also head of the military committee for NATO. And I met with him at his house in Wiltshire, in Hampshire, in England, some years ago. And he asked me to come because he wanted me to bring the briefing document that I had put together for the president. I think at that time it was the late Clinton years. And I said, all right, I'll come over. And I went over with my 4 daughters and wife, and they went off to see the Salisbury Cathedral. And I went and met with this former MOD head. And he was livid. He says, this never came across my desk. I was never read into this. And I said, and yet I have files from your own MOD about the landing of one of these objects at the Bentwaters, Rendlesham Forest, Bentwaters Air Force Base.
No kidding.
Yep, I have the documents. I have the trace landing. I have the U.S. military Air Force people's testimony that were there. So at this point, I have about 1,100 of these folks.
What's a trace landing?
When one of these, in this case, it was an extraterrestrial vehicle, not one of the man-made ones. So we call them ETVs for the ones that are of extraterrestrial origin. The ones that are man-made are often called ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, meaning that they're simulating, not totally, but simulating the energy propulsion capabilities. Paul Mellon was one of the few billionaires at the end of World War II, the Mellon family. And his grandson's on my team, who happens to have been Senator John Warner's son, the Republican senator from Virginia, just passed away. And Paul Mellon told John Warner IV that when the war ended, they went over and grabbed this thing because Adolf Hitler, his aerospace geniuses, were working on this disc that was not jet or rocket. It was electrogravitic. It was electromagnetic. They hadn't perfected it. They were working on that. We had the atomic bomb. But they brought it back, and Patton was going, George Patton was going, this is amazing what this would do for the world. No, this is going to be deep black. And he did not think that was a wise thing to do, so they took him out, made it look like an automobile accident. I can't be more specific because I'm walking a razor's edge here with what I'm saying. But that's what we're doing. And we need people to understand that this is a patriotic duty given what is at stake. People have killed for a lot more than $900 trillion, And the level of corruption is worrisome. Now, in 92, General Albert Stubblebine III, Bert, who had been head of Special Forces and Army Intelligence, Fort Huachuca, he intercepted me after we had this major contact event out in Florida and near Pensacola. And he subsequently, about a month later, personally offered me $2 billion to not pursue what I was doing and become part of his team. Now, they were trying to neutralize what I was doing. And as many people know, the CIA and some of those organizations have remote viewers who use consciousness to see remote places in the future.
Yeah, they've done studies with the Monroe Institute.
Oh, yeah, I knew Bob Monroe, all those guys. We had a whistleblower that we put his interview, he was willing to do it posthumously. So I did the interview with him. He died. His wife sent me his death certificate. And then I uploaded it on our YouTube channel, which I have. You can go to it. And his name was Pawlek, Pawelec. And he had been involved in the development of the embeddable radio frequency chips.
Really?
Yeah. And he knew of their use in simulating alien abductions that were being done by the CIA and military. We'll get into this in a moment, how deep the deception goes. So we put this up. In a few days, it hits 675,000 views. And then overnight, we check, and the counter is down to 6,700. they went in and chopped off those numbers so it would take it out of the algorithms as a trending video.
I've seen it happen.
Yeah. And so people who think that doesn't happen, I just want to say, I got a bridge to sell you to nowhere or swampland to sell you because they're just simply naive. And this is another reason why we have to find creative strategies to do this, because the corporate, if you look at the major media, there's a handful of individuals and corporations that control all of them, all of it. But see, someone like myself saying that's going to get cut out of any show. For example, I was on a show that had 22 million people listening live back some years ago. And I started talking about some of the senior membership of this committee that's running this covert program. And I got to one name. I talked about Admiral Bobby Ray Inman. He's been involved for decades with this. And then he went to the Board of Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC. It's one of the crown jewels of contracting on these exotic propulsion and energy systems. And we went to an unscheduled commercial break. A voice broke in, and the host had no idea. And it said, "Dr. Greer, change the direction of this conversation now, or we will dump this show live." I said, "With 22 million people listening?" He says, "Yes. Don't talk about this." And the host was so sad. And the host to this day will say, "Oh, we can talk about anything." So that's happened with the media. It's happened with the government programs, and it's happened in other sectors, financial, what have you. So the interests of we, the people, have gotten run over by the interests of a relatively handful of extraordinarily powerful corporate and individuals.
How many people do you think are involved at that level?
There are 200 or 300 people on this committee, and one branch of it is called MAGIC, the Majority Intelligence Committee, MAJI, but committee is a MAGIC. Well, I have a document that lists it. So this is in my book, Unacknowledged. That document's in there. It's a secret document that I acquired and published. They can't punish me because I declared the project's illegal. A lot of people say, "How have they not pursued you?" I said they can't. And I'm not intimidated. But, so they offer me $2 billion. I go, fuck off. Oh, sorry, my language, but, get lost. And then, they threatened. And in the 90s, we had 3 people on my team killed, and I was almost killed. And then I put security in place. It's invisible. But basically, there are very powerful people who want us to get this done because they know what's at stake. And we've authorized lethal force if anyone that I'm working with is harmed. And that's in place. That's been in place since 1998. And it's going to pull the curtain back, specifically on the lost 100 years of these technologies. And it's going to go all the way back, more than 100 years, to the Stubblefield Earth battery and Nikola Tesla standing there with his old farmer, where he's running his whole farm on this device where he has stakes in the ground that are tapping into this electromagnetic and mostly magnetic flux field and running generators running his farm. This is 1902. I got the picture. This document is going to blow. It goes from that all the way to the Lockheed Skunk Works devices that started being built in the 50s. We have witnesses and transcripts of the Norton Air Force Base show, California. Norton's closed now. But they had an air show in 1988 where there were 3 of these man-made UFOs, ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, hovering in this hangar. And those, we have those fully illustrated. We have enough detail. We actually have the schematics of the interior.
You have the schematics of the interior?
And the exterior, how they look. And these were built, interestingly, the witness who was there, who was an aerospace designer, saw that the components in it, now this is 1988, were from the late Mercury era. So the Mercury capsule, which was late 50s, early 60s. And they had markings and charts on them where they had been out in space around our solar system. They were specifically told these had gone through the solar system. Now, those were from the late 50s, early 60s. No jet fuel, no rockets. a lot of the devices going through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s that weren't the flying devices. But I'll give you an example. There was an inventor named Floyd Sweet, and he had a solid state device, looked like a little bigger than a cigarette pack, that you could attach to an electric motor, say for a car. It wasn't plugged in. Once it got going, it was a 0 point quantum vacuum flux, and it would run a 300 horsepower motor. So imagine having a 300 horsepower motor in your Tesla or your truck, and this little, and there are no batteries. You don't have 900 pounds of lithium-ion batteries, and the lithium-ion batteries really are destroying the environment. And you never have to plug it in. About the time he was going to get, he was meeting with some people at GM who thought they were interested, but they were actually just trying to find out what he had. After that meeting, he died suddenly, suspiciously.
How?
People claiming, well, he dropped dead of a heart attack. And that was plausible because he was an elderly guy. Mm-hmm. But before that, he had had an assassination attempt. He was going up some steps, and a sniper was trying to shoot it, but he didn't know it, but he tripped just as the bullet went right past his head. And we have the testimony of a lieutenant colonel who was involved in this case. The problem is that if you're a brilliant electromagnetic engineer, but you don't know the bear you're about to poke with that technology and what they'll do to keep it suppressed, you're destined to fail. So one of the reasons we're doing this documentary is to provide the context so that people who do have these devices come to us, and we have a strategy that we briefly outline in this documentary of how to fix this problem. Well, how do you fix it? The big mistake people make, they try to patent it, and we have actually a national security order denial on a patent of one of these devices from an inventor I know. So we're going to prove this is not a conspiracy theory. Here it is from the patent office. So they ain't going to allow it. It gets confiscated. We have a patent examiner who's a PhD physicist testify that they confiscate these things. I know of multiple devices that would literally save humanity and the planet that's happened to. So the system we have now requires the geopolitical and military instability, because I think we have it, if we're lucky, 20 years to make this transition.
Why do you say that?
Because the rate of decay of the biosphere, but also the geopolitical problems we're facing, when you have this growing number of the world's population in utter despair and poverty, and that's all based on the fact of the zero-sum game of our energy and financial system. There's no changing that. I mean, if all 8 billion people on the planet live like you and I do, with air conditioning or trucks, the price of a gallon of fuel would be $100 a gallon.
How many of these devices have you seen personally?
Maybe a dozen or so over the years that have been legitimate.
Can you describe what a couple of them look like?
Well, one of them will be in this documentary, and it was out in the desert of Arizona. I was there in September of 2022, and this old guy had out there, it looked like a shoebox, and it was sitting there running. It'd been there for 2 years, putting out 3 kilowatts of power.
Really?
The average home, on average, uses about 1.5 kilowatts.
What's inside of it?
He had some fake circuits so that nobody could steal his little secret ring, like Gollum in Lord of the Rings. And there were some specialized magnesium alloy plates. And it was basically resonating with the magnetic field, sort of similar to what Tesla did with the Wardenclyffe, his big Wardenclyffe system, but a much higher tech version. So what I have seen over and over again is very frustrating, is dozens of these accounts where they got it to a certain point. No one knew exactly how they were doing it. They kept all that secret. Next thing you know, someone's bought it off, they've died, or whatever, and it's lost forever. So we have to break this cycle. It's a crazy cycle.
You've seen a couple, around a dozen, I believe you just said. Are they all very similar?
Oh, no. There are very different ways. There are like probably 18 ways to skin this cat.
Really?
Yeah. Historically, that have existed with photos and videos and test results.
Let's move into the JFK Marilyn Monroe assassination.
Oh, some of the fun stuff.
Yeah, let's move into that. What do you know about that?
A lot. So some years ago, I got from the vault from a national security agency guy an envelope, and it had a big old Xerox of this document that was a wiretap of Marilyn Monroe, dated a couple of days before they found her dead. And it was signed by the CIA guy, James Jesus Angleton III. Now, he was a famous fanatical leak mole hunter and leak stopper at the agency back in the early 60s. Fanatical. And they had wiretapped Marilyn Monroe's phone, and she was calling up Bobby Kennedy and a friend of hers named Rothberg in New York, who was an art dealer, saying that she was going to hold a press conference to tell the whole world what Kennedy had told her about, and I'm quoting, the objects from outer space from the 40s found in New Mexico, a clear reference to Roswell and a couple of the other events that happened out there. So Marilyn, because I think the Kennedy brothers had distanced themselves because the affair she was having with Jack Kennedy was a little bit getting too well known, she was angry. And so she was threatening to spill the beans in a public news conference where the whole world would have been there. So before she could do that, Wetworks killed her, made it look like an overdose of drugs. And of course, Kennedy was livid that happened because he had affection for her, even though he had the distance for political reasons. But he was working on an executive order at that time that would have dissolved the agency and a lot of these operations that were dealing with this.
The agency is in CIA?
Yeah. So before that could go through the executive review process, he was killed.